All right, so are you ready for a story? It's, well, a ghost story, but also a pirate legend. It's really intriguing. We're going to be taking a deep dive into this account from an old sea captain that has been passed down through generations about Captain Ezekiel Banks and his ship, the Black Rose.
Ah, a good maritime mystery. Especially one with a little touch of the supernatural. What kind of sources are we working with here?
It reads like a first-hand account.
Yeah.
You know, it's got tons of vivid details and a lot of nautical jargon. You can practically smell the salt and hear the creaking of that old ship.
It's true that primary sources like that can really give a unique window into the past. So, what's the mystery? What makes this particular story so special?
Well, it starts with a chase. Captain Banks and the Black Rose are pursuing a merchant ship called the Perseverance, and they're relentless about it. We're talking 32 hours through a raging storm. Can you imagine the exhaustion, the torn sails, the ship barely staying afloat?
Wow, that sounds intense. That level of determination definitely suggests that it was a prize worth the risk. What else do we know about the Black Rose and her captain?
Well, the details are sparse, unfortunately, which really adds to the mystery. But the writing does hint that the Black Rose is a brigantine, which is a type of ship that was favored by pirates in the late 1700s because they were so fast and easy to maneuver. As for Captain Banks, he comes across as a hardened seaman, a man of action.
So he wasn't the stereotypical swashbuckling, flamboyant pirate captain.
No, not exactly. There's this one small moment where he shares a flask and some cake with his helmsman Robbie. It's a tiny detail, but it hints at the camaraderie and the shared hardship they must have had as a crew. They're facing this storm together.
That really speaks to the reality of life at sea for pirates, a blend of brutality but also dependence, forged in the face of constant danger. But what about the Perseverance? What's their role in this chase?
This is where things get really interesting. The Perseverance is actually laying a trap. They lure the Black Rose in close and then unleash this devastating cannon attack.
Ah, the classic naval tactic. Lull the enemy into a false sense of security and then bam! You strike with overwhelming force. What happens to the Black Rose?
Well, it's described as utter carnage. The Perseverance fires at point-blank range and tears the Black Rose apart. Many of the crew are killed instantly, and Captain Banks thinks he's dead too.
What a dramatic turn of events! So how does the story even continue if the captain is dead?
Well, that's the mystery, right? Captain Banks suddenly finds himself back on the Black Rose. The ship is completely whole, and the crew's alive. He's unharmed. It's like the attack never even happened.
That's really intriguing. It makes you think about the nature of reality and the possibility of near-death experiences. Does the account say anything about how Captain Banks reacts to this?
He's disoriented, of course. He even questions if it was all just a dream. But there's this strange sense of acceptance about it all, even contentment, despite what he just went through.
That calmness is unusual. You'd think he would be in shock. Does he try to figure out what happened?
Not Billy. He just sets a course for this chain of islands nearby, and that's where things take an even stranger turn.
All right, now you've got me hooked. What happens at the islands?
So the Black Rose has to sail through this treacherous reef. It's a passage that any sailor would tell you is impossible for a ship of that size to navigate. And the crew are working in this eerie silence. They move with this perfect synchronization that's almost supernatural. And it's Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve. Wow, that adds a whole other dimension to the story. What's the significance of that night in particular?
Well, on one of the islands, a family's gathered in their home. It's a humble little place. And they're celebrating Christmas Eve with a prayer and a very simple meal of apples. They have no idea that this spectral ship is approaching.
The contrast is striking. You have this harsh world of the pirates and then this quiet family celebrating. It feels very deliberate when you see
Oh,
it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And as the family finishes their prayers, the father goes outside and finds these two mysterious sacks. Inside, there's a feast, a cooked goose, fine wines, gifts for each child. It's all beautifully wrapped.
That sounds like a Christmas miracle. But who brought them?
The father looks out to the sea and sees the Black Rose sailing away through that impossible reef passage. It's bathed in moonlight. And it's heavily implied that Captain Banks and his crew are the ones who left the gifts.
But why? Why would they do that?
That's what we are here to figure out. Was this a supernatural encounter, a ghostly act of redemption, or something else entirely? Let's take a deeper look into the account, see if we can unravel this mystery.
Okay, so let's try and answer the big question here. What really happened to Captain Banks and his crew? We've got to weigh the evidence, we've got this violent encounter, this near-death experience, and then all these things that seem supernatural.
It really is strange. It's like they become these phantom pirates,
Yeah.
sailing right through solid rock and leaving gifts instead of taking them. That's not your typical pirate story.
You're right about that. It's not typical at all. So maybe we should start by looking at some of the more rational explanations. Do you think it's possible that it was all just a hallucination? Maybe Captain Banks got a head injury during the attack and the whole island thing is just his imagination?
That's a good point. The crew was definitely exhausted. That 32-hour chase through a storm would do that to anyone. And delirium could definitely mess with their perception.
Yeah, and we can't forget about the psychological impact of trauma. Seeing your crewmates die and thinking you're going to die yourself, well, that could trigger all kinds of psychological stuff.
So the ghostly actions, the sailing through the reef, even giving those gifts, that could all be Captain Banks' mind trying to cope with what happened, creating a story where he and his crew find some peace.
Exactly. It's like a way of taking back control in a situation that was totally chaotic and traumatic. But that brings up a question. What about the family? They saw the Black Rose too, and they got those gifts. Were they hallucinating too?
That's the thing that makes me think it's more than just a shared delusion. It seems less likely if there are multiple witnesses all having the same experience.
Yeah, it's one thing if Captain Banks sees things differently because of the trauma. But if the family has the same experience separately, that's a whole other level.
So what if we consider a supernatural explanation? What kind of forces could be at play here?
Well, we need to think about the historical context, right? Sailors back then, in the late 1700s and early 1800s, they believed in ghosts and spirits and all sorts of things, especially sea monsters.
Right, the ocean was so big and mysterious, people came up with these superstitions to try and explain things they couldn't understand.
That's right. So for Captain Banks and his crew, with all those stories and beliefs, seeing what happened as a brush with the afterlife wouldn't be that strange.
No, not at all. It would fit with everything they already believed. And remember, it all happened on Christmas Eve, a night that has, a lot of spiritual meaning. Is there a connection?
The timing is really interesting. I wonder if the spirit of Christmas, with its emphasis on forgiveness and redemption, somehow had something to do with what happened to them.
It's definitely possible. Maybe their ghostly acts of generosity were inspired by Christmas. A chance for them to make up for what they did in the past.
And the reef. That impossible passage. Maybe that was some sort of divine intervention. A path opened just for them on that special night.
That's a pretty compelling idea. It adds a layer of, moral complexity to the story. Even people who lived outside the law could be redeemed by acts of kindness and all that.
You're right. But if that's true, why not just move on to a peaceful afterlife? Why go back to being pirates, even if they are being nice now?
I don't know. It's a good question. Maybe they were tied to the Black Rose somehow, like their fate was bound to the ship.
Interesting. So instead of stealing and hurting people, they choose to give back. It's a different kind of pirate story. It makes you wonder if they kept sailing around, becoming some sort of ghostly Santa Claus.
Now that's a cool image. Kind of spooky, kind of heartwarming. But no matter what explanation we believe, the story is about giving.
You're absolutely right. Whether it's Captain Banks finding peace by being generous, or the spirit of Christmas changing them, it goes from taking to giving.
Yeah, and that's important. Even in the worst situations, when you're facing death even, there's still room for hope and kindness, and all those things that make us better people.
We still haven't really talked about the family's side of all this, though. They're the ones who received this incredible gift. What about their experience?
You're right. We should look at that more closely. Think about how something like that could change their lives and their beliefs. So we've talked about Captain Banks and the crew and the ship, the Black Rose. But what about the family? That family on the island, they're really a big part of this whole Christmas Eve thing.
It's interesting. Their side of the story is never really told. We see what the father does. He prays, finds the gifts, sees the ship sailing away, but we don't know what he was thinking.
Right. We can only imagine how that night changed their lives. Did it make their faith stronger? Did they feel amazed? Or maybe even scared of what they saw?
It just shows that every story has different sides to it, different points of view. We might focus on the pirates and what they went through, but it all affects other people too.
I guess that's true. It makes you think about how what we do can have consequences we don't even see. One small act of kindness can really affect someone, especially something amazing like this.
It really can. And the contrast is so strong, isn't it? You have this family living a very simple life. They have the little Christmas Eve dinner with just apples. And then you have these pirates. Two different worlds.
It's almost like the family is a reminder of what's important. like the values that people forget when they're chasing money and adventure.
Exactly. Their presence shows that Captain Banks and his crew made a choice. They could have kept being pirates the way they were, but they chose to be generous instead.
And they chose a family, right? The foundation of society. Maybe they wanted to connect again with something they'd lost at sea.
It adds another layer to their transformation. They weren't just looking out for themselves. They were trying to make things right with the world they left behind.
So their actions become even more meaningful. It's not just random kindness. It's about understanding the importance of community and how we're all connected, even when we're so different.
That's the amazing thing about people, isn't it? We can change and grow and find meaning in the strangest places.
But this story also makes us think about what we believe. If we say it was supernatural, what about people who don't believe in those things?
Good question. For the family, it might have proven their faith was real, showed them that a good power was watching over them.
But for someone who doesn't believe that, they might say it was all just a coincidence. A bunch of weird things happening for no reason.
Exactly. It shows that what we see as true depends on what we believe. One person's miracle is another person's coincidence.
And that's okay. This story isn't about forcing people to believe anything. It's about the mystery. About knowing that there are forces out there that we may never understand.
It's about understanding that we don't know everything. And that's what makes these stories so interesting. They make us question what we think is true and help us see that anything is possible.
And to see the beauty in the unknown. Well, this has been a journey, from a pirate attack to a ghost ship on Christmas Eve. We've talked about death, redemption, generosity, and the power of belief.
We've asked questions about what's real, about how trauma affects us, and how what we believe changes how we see things. And we've tried to see things from different sides.
Most importantly, we've seen how powerful stories can be. They take us to other places, make us use our imagination, and make us wonder about things long after the story's over.
So what have we learned? Even when things are bad, even when death is near, there's always hope. There's redemption, and there's always room for the unexpected kindness that can change us and the people around us.
And maybe, just maybe, there's a bit of magic in the world for people who are open to seeing it. So the next time you're looking out at the ocean, think about Captain Banks and the Black Rose.
Remember that even in the darkest times, a little light can shine through, and that even the most unlikely people can find redemption in the most unexpected ways.
And who knows, maybe you'll even catch a glimpse of that ghostly ship sailing on the horizon. A reminder that the sea is full of mystery, and so are our hearts.